Hi, my name is Carmen, and I am an early childhood special education teacher, a life and ADHD coach, and I'm the host of this podcast, Authentically ADHD. I created this podcast to help anyone wondering if they have ADHD, people who have been diagnosed for a while and want some more support and community. I'm here to bring you the latest research on ADHD and neurodiversities while we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of ADHD. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hi, and welcome back to the show. How are you doing? Are you doing okay? It is okay to pause and check in with yourself. I've had to do that quite a bit lately. I need to check in with my emotions, my relationships, and my overwhelm. In those areas, not to mention the sensory overload and overwhelm that we experience as ADHDers. So today, that is what we are talking about. Sensory overload, emotional overload, and that relationship overwhelm and the relationship dynamics that it affects, and the effects that it can have on your life in general. So I have just a little personal anecdote to kind of explain how these things go together. Here's one example. When I'm in my classroom, my name has been called 1,000 times. The kids are very invasive of personal space because it's preschool and they are still learning about their own personal bubbles. When I need to teach a student how to emotionally regulate, I need to be regulated, or these things will affect my work relationships with the kids, with my coworkers, my boss, etc. I'm sure there is a way that this can be applied to your life. And if not, please teach us your ways if you don't have issues with these things. Another example of how I personally experience this would be in the mornings. I'm not sure if there's anyone else who deals with this, and I do believe it's partially my ADHD, but I wake up full of thoughts and emotions. It's like an automatic reaction to waking up. And sometimes that overwhelm affects my ability to regulate appropriately, so I go off on my boyfriend, throwing all my emotions at him or the people in my household, which is not fair to anybody. If I'm also uncomfortable in any way, like my sensory issues are messed up, like this morning, it was very chilly outside, but I had a hoodie on, so I was sweating when I woke up. That really impacts my ability to regulate or control that impulse not to explode. This causes arguments, guilt, and lots of reflection on my end. And you may be wondering why this happens or what we can do to improve our skills in order to manage these symptoms. So let's get started. First, let's talk about ADHD and emotional regulation. The part of the brain that feels emotion is not the same part of the brain that we use to identify and label our emotions. And in the ADHD brain, both of these parts of the brain are underdeveloped. So I want you to imagine the ADHD brain is juggling all different types of balloons. They're all representing different emotions, thoughts, and sensory input. For the non-ADHD brain, these balloons are easily juggleable, and they're able to swap them in and out as needed. For the ADHD brain, some are bright and some are heavier than others, and some are fading into the background, unpredictability, and some without our knowledge. So emotional overload or dysregulation would be like a huge gust of wind blowing through the room. And now the balloons are erratic, popping and flying all over the place. Instead of taking and managing a few at a time, everything is up in the air, chaotic and overwhelming. That one event, a gust of wind, has now left us feeling unable to focus on anything else. It's left us feeling unable to keep our control. We're struggling. This can lead to feeling frustrated, anxious, and even paralyzed by the intensity of all the emotions, thoughts, and sensory input flying around. For people who have ADHD, this unpredictability and the gusts of emotional distress that come without warning, managing it all becomes exhausting. Pair this with low self-awareness and lack of impulse control, and we end up throwing our emotions at others instead of trying to regulate internally. The thing is, we as ADHDers have to intentionally improve our skills of self-regulation, emotional balance, and impulse control in order to manage life as a productive member of society. When you really think about it, all the executive functions are intertwined. I've talked about this before. They all work together in order for a person to function as a person on Earth. Executive functioning and executive function impairment is not like the only part of ADHD. Not only do we intentionally improve these skills, we also deal with things like sensory overload. Sensory overload in ADHD occurs when a person becomes overwhelmed by the amount or the intensity of sensory input from the environment. This can include noise, lighting, smells, textures, temperature, and input from our own brains. We struggle to filter out the irrelevant stimuli, making it incredibly difficult to focus. Imagine being in a room with the TV on, one headphone in, playing different things. It's really hot, it's full of people, and the lights are bright. Your clothes are too tight, and because you have ADHD, it's very hard to prioritize or ignore any of the unimportant sensory input, causing emotional and cognitive overwhelm. This is not something we can learn to improve. We can create environments that the world isn't built in ways that we can have a low sensory input. We have to use our tools in these situations, such as my favorite, my loop earplugs that help with sensory sound input, or using a weighted blanket to help keep calm and just calm your body down. We need to learn about and then practice ways to emotionally regulate and implement strategies for sensory regulation. So before we even touch on relationship overwhelm, I want to give you a few practical ways to regulate emotionally and help with that sensory overload, because I feel overwhelmed just writing about it, and it really helps to have a place that you're able to start, right? So first of all, I do have a freebie follow along in the show notes if you want to use that. So which do you feel supported by, and which area do you feel that you need more support? So I'm going to give some tips first. Doing one thing at a time makes it so much more effective as being a lifelong strategy. Okay, some tips for emotional regulation are gaining self-awareness, learning how to feel your emotions, breathing exercises, walks, reframing negative thoughts, and structuring your day in a way that helps reduce emotional distress. Some tips for managing sensory regulation are using sensory tools such as fidgets, earplugs, and personal lighting, taking sensory breaks, creating a calm environment where you can recover from overstimulation. Try to plan on how long you're going to be in overstimulating environments so that you can plan when you need to leave. Knowing if you will be in an environment that is overstimulating so that you can prepare properly. There are so many ways to emotionally regulate and kind of correct overstimulation, and these are just a few tips that I personally use and suggest for my clients. Find and do what works best for you. Also remember to take frequent breaks to refocus, regulate, and check in with how you're feeling and what you need. Now, the last topic of this episode is about relationship overwhelm and how all of this kind of affects relationships. You may or may not be aware of relationship overwhelm. It's a newer thing being researched, but when you think about it, it's still overwhelm, just in the category of relationships in your life. Managing friendships through remembering dates and plans, containing impulsivity when you are in conversation, trying not to assume our partner is mad at us through things that we have assumed, Did you know that people with ADHD can hyperfocus on people and that relationship with that person? Not to mention the planning, organization, and masking that goes into quote-unquote normal social events and gatherings and things that are expected of us. In order to avoid overwhelm and burnout within relationships, we have to be aware of our own limits and capacities. We need to learn how to and set healthy boundaries and have clear and kind communication, and setting expectations in ways that are clear and concise. It can be easy to blow up at a loved one when you're overwhelmed and frustrated, but it's never good for the relationship. So we have to learn and practice these skills. We really, really do. I didn't think I was going to be able to talk about all of this in 10 minutes, but we talked about a lot today. Overwhelm in 3 different areas of your life. Remember, there's a freebie follow along in the show notes to help you choose a place to start. Don't try to change it all at once. It won't work. You'll get frustrated and you'll give up. Ask me how I know. Just pick one and start there. Okay, my friends, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or on social media so we can help so many people work with their ADHD brains instead of fighting against them. Stay authentic, my friends, and we will talk soon. Speaking of extra supports, I just wanted to tell you all that I've updated my Patreon page to include all of the resources that I've really ever made to be held in one place. Just head to my show notes. The VIP members do get a little extra, but you can also purchase like my brand new Ultimate ADHD Journal and Planner, which I've been using for the past year that has worked. Nothing is priced over $10 and everything is at least 50 to 100 pages that you can download and print. You can get it to bind it and sent to you, or you can just read it off your screen and use notebook paper. So if you want or need any type of that kind of extra support, just head to my show notes and click the Patreon link to join. I hope to see you in there.